The morning air was crisp as Emily and Jake arrived at the entrance to Red Rock Canyon, the sun just beginning to spill over the sandstone cliffs in soft golden streaks. A sense of quiet anticipation hung between them as they laced up their hiking boots and adjusted the straps on their backpacks. This trip had been Jake's idea, his way of escaping the stress of his job and getting back to something simple, something real. Emily, always up for an adventure, had agreed without hesitation. They'd talked about this weekend for weeks, poring over maps and blogs, choosing a trail that was just remote enough to feel like a real escape but still marked on most hiking apps. It wasn't the most traveled path, but it promised stunning views and the kind of solitude that city life rarely allowed. They parked their car at a small gravel turnout, the only vehicle there at the time. As they started the trail, Emily paused to snap a photo of the sun rising behind the canyon's edge, the light casting long shadows across the rust-colored earth. Jake grinned and held out his hand for her, his eyes bright with excitement. Together, they moved into the landscape, stepping over loose rocks, ducking under the occasional twisted branch, the sound of their laughter echoing briefly before the canyon swallowed it up. It was the kind of morning that felt endless, full of promise, the world stretched out before them with no hint of what was to come. Hours passed as they hiked deeper into the terrain, the sun rising higher, the path becoming narrower and more uneven. They talked about everything and nothing, plans for the future, a new recipe Emily wanted to try, whether the stars would be clear that night. Their phones lost signal early on, but they didn't mind, that was part of the appeal. They weren't worried, they felt safe. But somewhere along the trail, they took a wrong turn, or maybe a part of the path had eroded, lost to time and weather. Whatever happened, the moment it began to go wrong wasn't obvious. There was no scream, no sudden panic, no sign of danger. Just two people, deeply in love, walking side by side into the silence of the canyon, never to return. As night fell over Red Rock Canyon, the desert cooled rapidly, the warmth of the day vanishing into the dark. Back in the city, Emily's sister tried calling her, expecting a quick update or even just a text. When the call went straight to voicemail, she didn't think much of it, maybe they were camping, maybe their phones were off. But as the hours ticked by with no word from either Emily or Jake, that small knot of worry began to tighten. By morning, concern turned into panic. Family and friends started calling each other, all realizing the same thing, no one had heard from them since they set out on their hike. Authorities were notified, and by that afternoon, a search and rescue operation was underway. Rangers, volunteers, dogs, and helicopters swept the area. Emily and Jake's car was still parked neatly where they'd left it, locked and untouched. It was a sign they'd made it onto the trail, but offered no clue as to where they'd gone next. The desert was unforgiving, full of twisting paths, sudden drops, and areas where GPS signals failed entirely. Over the following days, the search widened. Crews scoured canyons, scanned ridgelines, and examined every visible crevice. Flyers with their smiling faces were posted at ranger stations and trailheads, news segments aired their story, and online forums buzzed with theories. Still, nothing turned up. No tracks, no discarded gear, no signs of struggle. Even the search dogs failed to pick up a reliable trail. It was as if Emily and Jake had simply vanished into the earth. Friends recalled their excitement, how prepared they had been, how often they hiked. They weren't careless, people said. They knew what they were doing. That made it worse, somehow. It wasn't just a tragic accident, it felt like a mystery. And as the days turned to weeks, then months, the official search scaled down. But the families didn't stop. They organized their own efforts, hired private search teams, and clung to hope. Yet the silence from the canyon never broke. The case eventually faded from headlines, replaced by newer stories. But for those who loved Emily and Jake, the desert remained a wound that never healed, an open question with no answer. As time passed, the disappearance of Emily and Jake shifted from urgent headline to haunting mystery. In the early days, everyone had believed they would be found, maybe dehydrated and disoriented, but alive. Yet as weeks became months, hope thinned. The official investigation slowed, then quietly closed, leaving behind a file marked, unsolved. The lack of answers was the hardest part. There had been no storm, no reports of flash floods, no signs of animal attack or foul play. Their supplies had been solid. They were experienced enough, careful, and deeply familiar with hiking in the desert. It didn't make sense. People don't just vanish. But Emily and Jake had. Speculation filled the void left by facts. Online forums erupted with theories, some plausible, others wild. Some said they had run away to start a new life off the grid, but those who knew them dismissed it instantly. They had jobs, family, plans. Emily had a teaching interview lined up. Jake had just renewed his lease. Others believed they had gotten lost and succumbed to the elements, their remains simply missed by search teams. Red Rock was vast, after all, full of narrow ravines and hidden crevices. But searchers had combed every likely area multiple times. Had they climbed off trail to take a photo and slipped? Had a sudden rockslide trapped them in a place no one had looked? These questions echoed in every conversation, but none brought comfort. Their families lived in limbo, stuck between grief and denial. Birthdays came and went. Holidays were hollow. Emily's mother still called her phone sometimes, just to hear her voice on the voicemail. Jake's brother left a light on in his front window every night, hoping. People moved on, but the absence lingered like a shadow. The canyon became almost mythical in its silence, a place that had swallowed 2 lives without a trace. Occasionally, local hikers or amateur sleuths would return to Red Rock, hoping to stumble on something others had missed. But year after year, nothing surfaced. The trail remained quiet, the wind whispering through the rocks, holding its secret. Whatever had happened to Emily and Jake remained locked beneath layers of time and stone, until, unexpectedly, 4 years later, that silence was broken. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Kyle Barrett, a local fitness enthusiast and early rising jogger, decided to take a different route through Red Rock Canyon. He had run this area countless times, but something about that day pulled him toward a lesser-used side trail, one he'd never explored before. The air was still and cool, the desert bathed in a soft amber glow. With earbuds in and his water bottle slung across his shoulder, Kyle jogged at a steady pace, feet crunching over gravel and dried brush. The path narrowed quickly, curving around a set of boulders where the terrain became rough and slightly overgrown. It was clear that few people ever came this way. As he rounded a bend near a slope of loose rocks, something out of place caught his eye, a flash of faded color wedged between a cluster of stones. At first, he thought it was litter. He slowed, heart thumping slightly from exertion, and took a few steps closer. There, partially obscured by dust and debris, was an old backpack. The fabric was sun-bleached and weathered, the straps frayed, as if it had been there for years. Kyle hesitated, instinctively glancing around. He knelt beside it and brushed away some of the loose dirt, revealing a cracked zipper. Something about the pack's position didn't seem accidental. It looked like it had been tucked away, maybe even covered deliberately by nature or time. His fingers trembled slightly as he unzipped it. Inside were a few decayed items, a faded water bottle, a moldy protein bar wrapper, and then, a wallet. He opened it slowly. There was a driver's license inside, the photo still visible despite the wear. Emily Harper. The name struck a chord. Kyle stood up, breath catching in his throat. He recognized that name. Everyone in Nevada had heard about the couple who vanished here 4 years ago. With growing urgency, he looked around the area again. Not far from the pack was a pair of broken sunglasses and something half buried beneath a large rock. It looked like fabric, clothing, maybe. Kyle backed away and quickly called 911, stumbling over his words as he tried to explain what he'd found. Within hours, the trail was flooded with police, forensics teams, and local news crews. What had been a routine jog became a scene of stunned revelation. After 4 long years of silence, Red Rock Canyon was finally starting to speak. When authorities arrived at the scene, the sun had risen higher, casting sharp shadows over the rocks and illuminating the once hidden corner of Red Rock Canyon that had held its secret for so long. The old backpack, now carefully placed in an evidence bag, was handled with the delicacy reserved for something sacred. Investigators stood quietly around the area, their faces tense with the knowledge that they were standing on the edge of a long cold mystery. The contents of the pack had already offered a chilling lead, a driver's license, unmistakably belonging to Emily Harper. It was worn and slightly warped, but her face still smiled faintly through the plastic, frozen in time. Alongside it were 2 other items of significance, a small digital camera and a slim, weather-damaged journal, both equally fragile yet bursting with potential answers. Back at the station, forensics teams worked meticulously, drying pages and uploading the contents of the camera's memory card. The camera had corroded from years of exposure, but the memory card, to everyone's surprise, remained readable. Slowly, a series of images began to load onto a monitor. The first few showed smiling selfies of Emily and Jake, arms around each other with towering cliffs behind them. Other shots captured the trail they had followed, vistas of vast desert and layered stone, sunlight bouncing off distant peaks. Then, the tone of the images changed. The last several photos were darker, blurrier. One appeared to show the edge of a drop-off. Another was a close-up of a scraped hand on a rock, as if taken in a moment of panic or injury. The final photo was nearly all shadow, with what looked like a narrow crevice in the corner of the frame. It was hard to interpret, but there was a desperate, unfinished quality to it, as if it had been taken quickly, maybe as a signal, maybe by accident. The journal, though partially water-damaged, contained legible fragments. Emily's handwriting, once neat, grew shakier across the pages. She wrote of losing the trail, of feeling disoriented. She described how they had tried to climb to higher ground to regain their bearings but were met with crumbling rock and harsh sun. One entry mentioned Jake injuring his leg after a fall. Another described hearing voices, possibly searchers, but being unable to reach them. The final page simply read, "Still waiting. Still hoping." The date was nearly a week after they'd gone missing. The emotional weight of the discovery was crushing. Investigators, hardened by years of grim cases, stood in somber silence. These weren't just artifacts. They were echoes of two lives, voices reaching out from the past, speaking after years of silence. And though it didn't yet reveal everything, the backpack had given the case new breath, and pointed to a place nearby where the canyon might have hidden even more. Following the discovery of Emily's backpack and its haunting contents, investigators returned to the canyon with renewed urgency. The photos and journal entries gave them a rough idea of where the couple might have ended up, somewhere off the main trail, possibly in a narrow ravine or beneath unstable rock formations. A specialized search team was assembled, including geologists familiar with the terrain, forensic anthropologists, and cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains even after years. They moved carefully, fanning out from the area where the backpack had been found, methodically combing every slope, crevice, and shadowed nook. The sun beat down on them, and the quiet of the canyon made every sound, every shifting stone or rustle of wind, feel charged with anticipation. It was near the base of a jagged outcrop, about 300 yards from where the backpack had been discovered, that one of the dogs alerted. The team gathered, hearts pounding, as they uncovered what appeared to be fragments of fabric peeking from beneath a pile of loose rock and dried brush. Slowly and with painstaking care, the rocks were moved. What lay beneath left no doubt. Bones, long weathered and partially buried, had been resting undisturbed for years. Tattered remnants of hiking gear and faded clothing, one jacket identified by Emily's mother in old photos, confirmed what the team already feared. They had found the final resting place of Emily and Jake. As more of the site was uncovered, the grim picture began to take shape. The positioning of the bodies suggested that they had sought shelter or perhaps fallen into the shallow depression during a sudden shift in the terrain. Nearby, a section of the canyon wall showed signs of a rockslide, an unstable shelf that had likely given way without warning, possibly triggered by erosion or a minor quake. The debris had concealed them so completely that even aerial searches years earlier had missed the location entirely. One set of bones had a fracture consistent with a fall, matching the journal's mention of Jake's injured leg. It appeared they had been trapped, unable to climb out or signal for help, hidden just out of reach from rescue efforts. The scene was solemn. Investigators, many of whom had worked the original case, stood silently as the remains were carefully gathered and preserved. News of the discovery spread quickly. For the families, it was a crushing relief, grief laced with closure. They had feared this ending but also needed it. After years of unanswered questions, of birthdays missed and hope stretched thin, the canyon had finally given them back their loved ones. Not alive, but no longer lost. The confirmation came 3 days after the discovery. DNA testing, dental records, and personal belongings left no room for doubt. The remains found beneath the rubble in Red Rock Canyon belonged to Emily Harper and Jake Nolan. The announcement was made during a quiet press conference at the county sheriff's office. There were no dramatic reveals, no flashing lights, just a somber gathering of officials, family members, and reporters who had followed the story from its earliest days. Sheriff Donnelly stepped up to the podium, his voice steady but thick with emotion. He recounted the timeline, thanked the teams who never gave up, and finally confirmed the truth that had eluded everyone for so long. "We now know Emily and Jake never left Red Rock Canyon," he said. "They were trapped by natural forces, hidden from view all these years. They didn't run. They didn't disappear. They were just missed." For the families, the news was both devastating and strangely comforting. Emily's mother clutched her daughter's scarf as she stood near the back of the room, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. Jake's father, a quiet man who had rarely spoken to the media, bowed his head and whispered a short prayer. Though the grief resurfaced with fresh pain, it came with a new layer: peace. They no longer had to wonder. No more sleepless nights imagining worse possibilities, no more scanning crowds or watching strangers' faces on the street, hoping for a miracle that would never come. In the following days, a memorial was held at the base of Red Rock Canyon, near the trailhead where Emily and Jake had begun their journey. Dozens gathered: family, friends, hikers, rescue workers, even strangers who had followed their story over the years. Candles were lit, photos were displayed on a stone outcrop, and handwritten notes fluttered in the warm breeze. Someone played soft music on an acoustic guitar while a park ranger read excerpts from Emily's journal, the ones that spoke of hope, of love, of holding on. The finality of it all hit hardest in the quiet moments afterward. Their story had captured the community's heart not because it was unusual, but because it was achingly human, a reminder of how fragile life is, how nature can be both breathtaking and unforgiving. In the end, Emily and Jake hadn't vanished without a trace. They had left behind memories, words, and a lasting reminder of their bond. And now, after 4 long years, they had finally come home. In the days that followed the recovery of Emily and Jake's remains, investigators completed their analysis of the site, piecing together the final moments of the couple's lives. The terrain where they were found was unstable and rarely traversed, an area not marked on public trail maps, nestled between sheer walls and a loose slope of red stone. Geologists brought in to assess the location concluded that a rockslide had likely occurred around the time of their disappearance, a quiet collapse of the canyon wall that would have been sudden, powerful, and nearly impossible to escape once in motion. It wasn't the kind of dramatic landslide that shook the earth or sent dust clouds billowing into the sky. Instead, it was silent and insidious, shifting tons of stone in seconds and sealing the couple beneath a tomb of debris before anyone knew what had happened. Evidence supported this theory. The fractured bones, the scattered gear, and the positioning of the bodies indicated that they had been caught off guard, possibly while trying to navigate back to a clearer path or find shelter from the intensifying heat. Jake's broken leg, referenced in Emily's journal, may have been the result of an early fall. Trapped, injured, and cut off from visibility, their only hope had been to wait. Emily's words in the journal, hopeful at first, slowly gave way to fear, and finally to quiet resignation. They had no way of knowing how close they were to being found. In fact, search parties may have passed within just a few hundred yards without ever realizing it. The rockslide had rendered their voices, their movements, invisible. As this conclusion was released to the public, reactions were mixed: sorrow, frustration, relief. The canyon, so revered for its beauty, now stood as both a monument to the couple's love and a symbol of the indifferent force of nature. Some hikers said they would never see the area the same way again. Others, including the families, found a strange comfort in knowing that Emily and Jake had stayed together until the very end, their final moments spent side by side in a place they had chosen together. There was no foul play, no malice, just the unpredictability of the natural world and the quiet bravery of two people facing it. A small plaque was later installed near the trailhead, inscribed with their names and a simple quote from one of Emily's final journal entries: "We still have each other." That's something. Visitors now often stop to read it before they begin their hikes, pausing in the early morning light to remember the couple who went into the canyon with hope and love, and who now rest in its eternal silence.